The perfect defense listens for everything. It tracks your engine from miles away, it waits for you to make a sound. So, what happens when an Allied pilot decides the only way to win is to turn his 7-ton fighter into a silent falling spear? This is the true story of the forbidden Die Vida Day. Captain James Harlow weaponized silence against the Nazis in a single suicidal run that changed the war in the Alps. Watch to the end to see if this impossible gamble pays the ultimate price. We've just seen a pilot choose to turn his plane into a falling brick. Which brings me to a question for you. What is the one universal constant of 1944 aviation that Captain Harlow's entire plan is built upon breaking? The answer to that question is hidden somewhere in this mission. It's the core of the German defense and the key to his impossible gamble. Keep watching and you'll discover exactly what he had to silence to survive. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The 19th of July, 1944, 10:47 a.m. The most terrifying thing in the sky over the Apennine Mountains was not the flak. It was the quiet. At 12,000 feet, a lone Republic P-47 Thunderbolt ceased to be an aircraft. Its massive 18-cylinder engine, a Pratt Whitney radial capable of shaking the earth, went silent. The four-bladed propeller froze. The 7-ton fighter, laden with 2,000 pounds of bombs and fuel, became a falling anvil. Inside the cockpit, Captain James Wildcard Harlow fought every instinct screaming in his spinal cord. His hands, sweating inside leather gloves, hovered over the throttle. To restart was to live. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. To stay silent was to die. The flight manuals were explicit. A dead-stick dive in a Thunderbolt was not a tactic. It was a funeral rite. But the manuals were written for a different war. Harlow's war was here, in this jagged cut of rock between Italy and Austria called the German Pass. Below him, snaking through the valley floor, was the only rail line that mattered, the lifeline of the German 10th Army. And guarding it was not just steel, but sound. To understand why a man would choose to fall out of the sky, you have to listen. The Germans had turned the mountains into a giant primitive ear. They called them Horter-T-listening devices. Giant acoustic trumpets manned by crews who could distinguish a B-17S drone from a P-51S scream at 10 miles. Their network was crude but brutally effective. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. It turned the Alps into a resonant chamber. The moment an Allied engine entered the pass, the sound would echo off granite walls. The Horch operators would triangulate, pick up a field telephone, and whisper coordinates. By the time the aircraft appeared, the 88mm flak batteries were already tracking, their gunners' fingers resting on firing levers. The first burst was always for range. The second was to kill. But the true genius of the German defense was its simplicity. They didn't need to shoot down every plane. They just needed to buy 60 seconds. That's all it took for the alert to sound, for the engineers to slam throttles forward, and for the vital ammunition trains to vanish into the mouths of the mountain tunnels. The granite was 50 feet thick. A direct hit from a 500-pound bomb on the surface above would barely scratch the paint on a boxcar hidden inside. For months, the Allied bomber pilots of the 79th Fighter Group had been performing a lethal, futile ballet. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Dead brave, the flak alley, lose friends to the predictable, murderous fire, only to watch their targets, the ghost train, slide into the rock and disappear. They were dropping immense payloads of high explosive on geography. Captain Harlow had watched a close friend, a pilot named Callahan, take a direct hit from an 88 over Tunnel Number 6. His P-47 had disintegrated. That same afternoon, intelligence reported a full train of Panzer IV tank reinforcements had passed through that very tunnel, unscathed. The equation was intolerable. By every known rule of aerial combat, the defense was perfect. The attackers were predictable, they were loud, and they were dying. Harlow began to study the one element the Germans had weaponized, but could not control: silence. The idea was born not in a briefing room, but in a moment of helpless observation. Grounded by a storm, Harlow watched a peregrine falcon hunting over the airfield. The bird didn't chase its prey. It climbed high above it, folded its wings, and became a bolt. It struck in utter silence. The physics were undeniable, but insane. A P-47 Thunderbolt was the antithesis of a Falcon. It was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Pilots joked that it didn't land so much as defeat the Earth through sheer force. Its glide ratio the measure of how far it can travel without power was compared to that of a grand piano. A dead engine didn't just mean loss of thrust. It meant the massive, flat-bladed propeller became a brutal air brake, causing a catastrophic drop in airspeed and an immediate, violent stall. To attempt a silent attack was to trade one certain death for another. The flak would not kill you. Gravity would. Yet, Harlow saw a crack in the physics. In a steep controlled dive, weight becomes velocity, and velocity extreme, velocity could transform a falling brick into a stabilized spear. The propeller wasn't just a brake, it was a variable. The pilot had a lever in the cockpit to change the blade pitch. In fine pitch, the blades were flat, creating maximum drag. But in coarse pitch, they turned edge, onto the wind like knives. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The theory was this: climb to an absurd altitude, cut the engine, pitch the prop to course, and point the 7-ton spear at the ground. You would be silent, you would be fast, you would be a ghost. And if you misjudged the dive by a single degree, or if the engine failed to cough back to life when you needed it, you would be a permanent part of the Italian geology. He practiced in secret over the Allied-controlled waters of the Adriatic. The first attempt was a near-fatal lesson in aerodynamic reality. At 10,000 feet, he pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The silence was visceral. The roaring beast in front of him died. Then the plane tried to kill him. The nose pitched down violently. The airspeed bled away as the flat, prop drag took hold. The stall warning shuddered through the airframe. He was not diving, he was tumbling. He fought the stick, heart hammering against his ribs, as the blue sea spun lazily in the canopy. It took 2,000 feet of falling before he remembered the propeller lever. He slammed it forward. The blades twisted. The shuddering stopped. The Thunderbolt, now in a 45-degree dive, began to accelerate. Not flyfall with purpose. The altimeter unwound like a bomb fuse. 8,000, 6,000, 4,000, the airspeed needle climbed past 300 knots. The controls were taut, alive. The only sound was the wind screaming over the canopy, a high, clean whistle. 2,000 feet, with the sea filling his vision, he shoved the mixture rich and hit the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered oil, then roared. He pulled back on the stick, his vision graying from the G-forces as he leveled off mere hundreds of feet above the waves. He fired. The Corsair's 6.50 caliber machine guns erupted in a synchronized volcanic cough. A torrent of armor, piercing incendiaries converged on the bomber's cockpit and wing root. The effect was not cinematic. It was horrifically efficient. The glass canopy dissolved into a cloud of glittering dust. The right engine seized, then vomited a thick, black oil smear across the sky. The Jill seemed to stumble in midair, its nose jerking down as if it had struck an invisible wall. It was not yet falling. It was mortally wounded, beginning its long, inevitable descent to the sea 2 miles below. But in that first, violent impact, the entire Japanese formation recoiled. This was the psychological fracture. They had expected a target to scatter or die. They had not expected the target to strike the first, annihilating blow. The tight spearhead formation, a symbol of their strength, now became a liability. You will either be a genius, or you will be a red smear on a map. There is no in-between. The tactic is forbidden. The order was explicit, yet the intelligence bulletins grew more urgent. German rail traffic through the pass had increased by 300. The Gothic line was being reinforced by the hour. Every train that slipped through meant more American boys would die in the mountain fighting. Harlow chafed under the order. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. He watched the mission boards, the frustrated debriefs of returning pilots, flak heavy, target entered tunnel before release. The ghost trains were winning. And then, on the morning of the 19th of July, photo reconnaissance delivered a single devastating photograph. It showed a train longer than any previously seen, carrying under tarps the distinct, ominous shapes of Nebelwerfer rocket artillery weapons that could saturate an entire company's position in seconds. It was parked inside the most fortified location in the pass, Tunnel Number 8, the Iron Gullet. The intelligence assessment contained a fatal sentence: target is acoustically shielded. Conventional attack is not advised. Colonel Reed stared at the photo for a long time. Then he sent for Harlow. The briefing was not a conversation. It was a transaction. Reed didn't look at Harlow. He kept his eyes on the grainy photograph of the iron gullet. "That train moves tonight," he said, his voice flat. "If those rocket batteries reach the front, they will obliterate the 88th Division's flank. The casualty projection is in the thousands." He finally turned. His eyes were the color of flint. "You have a theory, a forbidden one." This tunnel, he tapped the photo. "The entrance is under a granite overhang. A conventional dive bomb run is a geometrically impossible shot. You have to fly into the valley, parallel to the track, and skip a bomb through the mouth. A level approach." He let the implication hang. A level, low-altitude approach in a roaring P-47 was a prescription for being shredded by the quad 20mm cannons known to be nested above that tunnel. "The Horkerty will hear you coming 5 minutes out," Reed stated. "They will have a tea party waiting for you." Reed stood, turning his back to look out the operations hut window. "I am ordering a standard 2-ship armed reconnaissance of the pass for 1100 hours. You will lead, Lieutenant Cole will be your wing. What you do in that valley is your judgment as mission commander." He didn't turn around. "I will be in a meeting. Do not radio the details. In fact, don't radio anything unless you're dying." The order was clear: succeed or vanish. The colonel would have deniability. Harlow would have only the physics of a falling brick, and one chance to prove they could be weaponized. On the hardstand, the ground crew had loaded the bombs, a single 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb under the fuselage. The fuses were set for a quarter-second delay for a skip. Bombing run, it was the only setting that allowed a chance the bomb would ricochet off the valley floor or the track bed and hopefully carry him into the tunnel mouth before detonating. His wingman, Lieutenant Charlie Chip Cole, sauntered over. Flight helmet in hand, wildcard. "One big one, huh? Gonna dig him a new tunnel." Harlow forced a grin. "Just trying to make a statement. Chipwell, save some for the rest of us. Heard the flak's extra spicy over the gullet today." Cole's bravado was genuine. He had no idea his flight lead was planning to turn his airplane into a glider. As they ran through the pre-flight checks, Harlow's world narrowed to a few critical controls: the mixture lever, the propeller pitch control, the manual bomb release. His survival depended on the precise sequential manipulation of these 3 devices, while falling at over 350 miles per hour in a state of deafening silence. The engines coughed to life, the deep-throated roar of the Thunderbolts vibrating up through the aluminum floor. As they taxied, Harlow ran the numbers in his head one final time: 12,000 feet. Cut engine, course pitch, 40-degree dive. Glide slope, 6 miles. Restart at 1,500 feet. If the engine doesn't catch by 800, pull the handle and pray the chute clears the ridge. Every variable was a potential death sentence. It wasn't a killing shot. It was a message written in fire and lead. "I am not prey." The damaged Zero peeled away, smoke trailing from its wounded engine. But the victory was microscopic. The fuel gauge needle now trembled on the edge of the red, and the sky around him was still filled with enemies, their initial shock hardening into a cold, collective rage. They had been humiliated. A solitary plane had broken their formation, damaged, and there it is, the answer to the question I asked you earlier. The one constant Harlow had to break was noise. The entire Horkerty defense network, the flawless German trap, was designed to listen for the thunder of an engine. By choosing to fall in silence, Harlow wasn't just flying a new tactic, he was erasing the very thing the enemy was built to hear. A bomber and wounded a fighter. Now, the remaining 20 pilots understood the truth. This would not be a quick kill. It would be a ritual dismantling. They began to regroup, not as a confused mob, but as a coordinated wolf pack, moving to encircle the wounded Corsair from all points of the compass. Mackenzie had won a moment. He had just guaranteed himself a longer, more terrible death fuel. It is the silent master of every aerial engagement. More than courage, more than skill, it is the unyielding clock that ticks in every pilot's head. Cole's reply was crackled with static. "You're the boss, red lead. I've got your 6. "You don't," Harlow thought. "Not where I'm going." He pushed the throttle forward, climbing past Cole, the engine groaning as it hauled its immense weight higher. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. 11,000 feet, 11,500. The world outside the canopy turned a deeper blue. The peaks now rose around him, not below. The pass was a dark crevice. At 12,000 feet, he leveled off. The Iron Gullet Tunnel was a faint, dark speck on the valley floor 10 miles north. The math was now reality. He took a final look at his instrument panel, all needles in the green. He took a deeper breath, the oxygen from his mask tasting metallic. His left hand rested on the mixture lever. This was the point of no return. In the manual, this action was labeled only for engine failure or emergency landing. He was about to use it as a weapon. He clicked the radio once more. Red 2, experiencing some rough engine. Might need a low-power run, stand by. Before Cole could question the absurdity of that statement in hostile airspace, Harlow pulled the mixture lever all the way back to idle cutoff. The roar died. It was not a fade. It was an amputation. 1 second, the world was a violent, shaking thunder. The next, it was a vacuum. The propeller seized into a fixed, stark cross against the sky. The immense drag of the flat blades punched Harlow forward against his harness. The Thunderbolt shuddered as if it had struck a wall, then the nose pitched down violently. Silence swallowed him. The only sound was the rush of wind building to a scream as the aircraft began to fall. His stomach lurched into his throat. The altimeter needle began to spin counter. Clockwise 11,500, 11,000. He fought the stall, pushing the stick forward, forcing the nose down further into a true dive. The airspeed was bleeding away. He was falling but not moving forward. The dead propeller was an anchor. The granite walls of the pass were getting closer, not receding. The thought cut through the panic. His right hand, gloved and clumsy with cold, found the propeller control lever. He threw it forward into full course. With an almost audible groan, the 4 blades twisted into their knife edge pitch. The shuddering ceased. The drag vanished. Now the heavy fighter began to accelerate. Gravity had it, and it would not be denied. The dive steepened to 50 degrees. The windscreen became a shriek. The airspeed needle climbed. 250, 300, 350 knots. He was a 7-ton bullet in a silent barrel aimed directly at the heart of the German defense. In his ear, he could hear the faint, frantic crackle of Cole's voice, calling for him. But Harlow was no longer on the radio. He was already a ghost. The valley walls, once distant scenery, now rushed up to fill his canopy. They were no longer mountains, they were geography, moving at 400 miles per HR. Details became terrifyingly clear. Individual trees, rock slides, the glint of a stream. He was below the crests of the ridges. He was in the kill box, and nothing happened. No black puffs of fem fire, no streaking tracer from the quad fem positions. The flak towers, tiny concrete teeth from this angle, were silent. The Horkerte had been listening for the grind of a supercharger, the rhythmic thunder of 18 cylinders. They were not programmed to hear the whistle of a falling spear. His entire world was the rushing landscape and 3 instruments: the altimeter, unwinding past Fey feet, the airspeed, holding a steady Fey knots, and the improvised sight line head-painted on his canopy, aligning with the tunnel mouth 4 miles ahead. He was perfectly on track, a silent, supersonic shadow. But the silent approach was only half the trap. The other half was the escape. To release the bomb, he would have to level out, sacrificing velocity for a stable bombing run. He would be slow, he would be low, and the moment that Fei pound bomb left its rack, the Germans wouldn't need sound to see him. He was trading the cloak of silence for a 3-second window of vulnerability. In those 3 seconds, every gun in the valley would open up, and his engine had to start. At Fei feet, still screaming down at a 40-degree angle, the tunnel mouth was no longer a speck. It was a distinct black square in the gray rock face, the concrete reinforcement around it like puckered lips. The quad Fade M emplacement was visible just above it, a sandbag nest, quiet and inert. He could see the train, the faint shape of boxcars deep in the shadow. Time compressed. The final calculations were not conscious, but instinctual, beaten into him by the secret practice dives. He began the pullout. The G-forces slammed him down into his seat. His vision tunneled, graying at the edges as he fought the stick, pulling the nose up, trading his precious speed for level flight. The wind scream dropped in pitch, 500 feet above the valley floor. 400 feet. He was skimming the treetops, the shadow of his plane racing along the ground beside him. The tunnel rushed toward him. He steadied the aircraft, the wings perfectly level. The black square filled his gun sight. In that moment, he was utterly exposed. The silent glide was over. The Thunderbolt was now a loud, slow, and obvious target, flying straight and level. A child could have hit it. His thumb found the bomb release on the control stick. He pressed it. A jolt shuddered through the airframe. As the 1-ton bomb dropped away, it would fly forward, strike the earth just short of the tunnel. And if the gods of physics were with him, skip upward and inward. He had done it now. He had to survive the consequence. He did not wait to see the result. Survival was now a sequence of actions performed under fire. As the bomb fell away, his left hand moved in a blur. Mixture, leverage. Fuel booster. Pump on. His right hand stabbed the starter button. Behind him, the world erupted. First, sound, the quad-fin cannons above the tunnel woke up. Tracer fire, brilliant green in the daylight, snapped past his canopy like angry hornets. They had been caught utterly unprepared, their operators perhaps staring in disbelief at the silent plane that had simply appeared, but their training took over. A curtain of steel began to weave itself across the valley ahead of him. Then light, a flash so bright it bleached the color from the world, erupted from the tunnel mouth, not an explosion at the tunnel, but within it. The quarter-second delay fuse had done its job. The skip had worked. The shockwave hit him an instant later. It was not a sound, but a physical blow. The Thunderbolt was slapped sideways in the air as if swatted by a giant. The canopy vibrated violently. The controls went sloppy for a hard, stopping second. And through the chaos, one sound was absent, the roar of his own engine. The propeller was still a dead cross. The starter motor whined, futile against the cold, seized mass of the Pratt Whitney radial. The engine coughed once a wet, sickly sound and fell silent. He was at 300 feet, flying level with no power. Into a wall of flak, the mathematics of doom were simple. A gliding P-47 had the lift characteristics of a stone. He was losing altitude at over 100 feet per second. Ahead, the valley curved. The granite wall of the southern ridge filled his windscreen. The flak gunners, recovering from their shock, found their range. An 88mm shell burst off his right wing, the concussion rocking the aircraft. Shrapnel pinged against the armored plating behind his seat. He had seconds. He stabbed the starter again, his eyes glued to the manifold pressure gauge, begging for a flicker of life. The whine of the starter was a pathetic noise against the cacophony of explosions. Primer, you forgot the primer. He reached for the survival knife sheathed on his flight suit. The water was at his chin. He had seconds before the canopy was fully submerged, before the sinking aircraft gained irreversible momentum. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. He sawed at the thick canvas strap of his harness. The blade moved sluggishly in the water. The world closed in. The last pocket of air bubbled past his ears with a desperate gurgle. Darkness enveloped him. The only sound was the groan of the dying aircraft and the thunder of his own heartbeat. With a final, tearing pull, the strap parted. He was free. But freedom now meant being loose inside a sinking metal coffin. He pushed himself away from the seat, turned, and kicked for where he remembered the canopy outline to be. His head struck solid plexiglass. He was trapped. In his disorientation, he'd kicked toward the floor. He flailed, lungs burning, searching for the canopy edge, the open sky. His hand found the handle of the emergency release. He pulled nothing. The internal pressure from the sinking aircraft had sealed it shut. It was a known flaw, a nightmare scenario. Every Corsair pilot had heard in whispers. He was entombed. Above, the circling Zeros saw the air bubbles from the sinking plane break the surface. They saw the spreading oil slick. To them, it was over. The American was dead. The score was settled, albeit at a humiliating cost. One bomber damaged. One fighter lost to a rock. For one man, they began to form up. The hunt concluded. They would return to Jima and report the destruction of a lone, reckless American fighter. Secondary explosions, propagating down the length of the tunnel, turned the mountain itself into a bomb. Behind him, a roiling, fire-black plume erupted from the tunnel mouth, vomiting pieces of rolling stock and molten steel hundreds of feet into the air. The shock wave, funneled by the tunnel, shot down the valley like the blast from a cannon overtaking him. His regained power was his only salvation. He nosed down again, diving for the deck, using the raw horsepower of the Thunderbolt to outrun the pursuing wave of overpressure and debris. In his headset, Cole's voice was screaming, shrill with panic and relief. "Red lead? Jesus Christ, red lead, are you hit? The whole mountain just blew. What did you do?" Harlow couldn't answer. His hands were trembling violently on the controls. The adrenaline was receding, leaving a hollow, shaking void. He had done the impossible. He had broken the perfect defense. But the mission wasn't over. He was still deep in enemy territory, in a wounded, fuel-starved aircraft, with every German gunner in the Alps now alerted to his presence. The silent ghost had just announced its existence with the loudest possible statement, and he had to get home. The return flight was a different kind of trial. The cloak was gone. The element of surprise, expended in a single volcanic flash. Word of the attack would be leaping down German fields, telephone lines. Fighters from nearby Jagerschwader bases would be scrambling. The predictable exit routes from the pass would be crawling with hunters. He took the unorthodox path. Instead of climbing for safety, he stayed low, using the contoured valleys as a maze. His P-47 thundering mere feet above alpine meadows and glacial streams. He was a blur to any spotter, but the thunder of his engine now echoed for miles a beacon. He was hundreds of miles from friendly territory. The fleet's location was a guess. His position was unknown. The single-man life raft, which should have been his salvation, was still stowed in the sunken Corsair. All he had was his Mae West life vest, already losing buoyancy from a slow leak where the canopy glass had torn it. The rock was his only objective, not as salvation, but as a postponement of death. A floating man was invisible. A man on a rock, however barren, was a point on a chart. It was something to be seen. He began to swim. It was less a swim than a desperate, thrashing struggle against the current that wanted to pull him away from the stone pinnacle. Every movement sent fresh jolts of pain from cuts and bruises he hadn't yet registered. His waterlogged flight suit weighed him down, a leaden second skin. The salt in his wounds was a constant, burning agony. The Pacific is not a still pond. It is a living, breathing entity with a pulse. Swells lifted him up, offering a glimpse of the jagged black stone, then dropped him into troughs where he saw nothing but walls of water. The sound of the surf against the rock grew louder, pounding. Rhythmic roar that promised not shelter, but violence. After an eternity of effort, his feet scraped against submerged rock. He was in the breakers now, in the zone where the ocean fought its final furious battle with the land. White water churned around him, pulling him under, slamming him against barnacle-encrusted stone. He clung, fingers tearing on sharp edges, his body battered by each wave. The physics he had weaponized were now turning against him. The Thunderbolt, for all its power, was a glutton, and it was running out of food. The coastline, when it finally appeared, was not a relief. It was a taunt. A thin, hazy line of blue separating the brown mountains from the darker blue of the sea. It was still 20 miles out. His fuel warning light glowed a persistent, accusing amber. The engine began to run rough, the steady roar breaking into intermittent coughs as the last vapors in the lines were sucked dry. He was now flying the world's heaviest gliderwagon, but this was not the controlled, calculated fall of the attack. This was the ragged, dying stagger of a wounded beast. Altitude was his only currency, and he had spent it lavishly to stay alive. He was at 1,500 feet and sinking. The airfield was north. He didn't have the height to reach it. His choices narrowed to two: the unforgiving sea or a farmer's field. No one would think to look for a living man on an uncharted seamount. He was not saved. He had merely exchanged a quick death for a slow one: dehydration under a punishing sun, exposure to the night cold, or discovery by a Japanese patrol boat, which would either machine, gun him, or take him to Chichi Jima, an island fortress known for the torture and execution of captured airmen. He pulled the signal mirror from its case. He held it up, catching the sun. He flashed it toward the empty west, toward where he prayed the fleet might be. A pointless, repetitive gesture, a flicker of light in an ocean of blue. He did it again and again, not because he believed it would work, but because the act of signaling was the opposite of surrender. It was the last thread connecting him to the world of the living. As long as he flashed the light, he was still a combatant. He had not yet been erased. The landing was not an arrival. It was a controlled demolition. The undercarriage, designed for paved runways, sheared off instantly. The Thunderbolt's belly hit the stony earth, carving a brutal spark-showered trench through the vineyard. It slewed sideways, the left wing digging in and snapping off with a sound like a cannon shot. The world became a violent spinning blur of dirt, shattered wood, and twisting metal. Then, stillness. Smoke curled from the ruptured cowling. The smell of raw earth, high-octane fuel, and scorched metal filled the cockpit. Harlow unclenched his hands from the controls. He was alive, bruised, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but whole. He pushed back the shattered canopy and stumbled out into the torn-up field. In the distance, he could hear the sirens from the base. An ambulance, a jeep, were already churning dust down the road. Colonel Reed's jeep arrived first. He didn't ask about the plane. He looked past Harlow to the north, where a distant black smudge still stained the horizon over the Alps. "Reconnaissance just confirmed," Reed said, his voice devoid of any triumph. "Tunnel 8 is collapsed for a quarter-mile. Nothing got out." He finally looked at Harlow, at the wreckage of the plane, at the price etched in oil and blood on the Italian soil. "They never heard you coming, did they?" Harlow shook his head, the adrenaline crash leaving him cold and hollow. Reed nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. The perfect defense had a flaw. It could only listen for war as it knew it. It couldn't hear the silence that came before the end. The tactic was never officially adopted. It was too risky, too dependent on a single pilot's nerve and a cascade of perfect physics. It remained a footnote, a forbidden gambit played in one desperate moment. But for the German logistics officers in the Rhetian Pass, the lesson was absolute. The mountains, their greatest shield, could be turned against them. You could, it seemed, weaponize silence. And on a clear July day in 1944, silence had fallen from 12,000 feet and left an entire mountain burning from the inside out. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more.